it's all going to come down to this final fight here. Does the shroud positioning matter? It looks like they've clumped up all on the left side here. The Fiora goes dash dancing around, has cleared up the front line, but the Fiora, with that extra Giant Slayer, manages to take down Bluey, and that is it. Tamura finishes up Lobby A game number 5 with a perfect victory.
Hello and welcome back to another video. In today's video, I'm going to be giving you 10 rules in TFT that you should generally be following. Now, of course, every single game is different and you don't need to follow these rules religiously, but if you're going against them more often than not, then you can probably safely say that you're making quite a few mistakes that you might not be realizing that you're even making. In TFT, the standard leveling pattern is to go 4 on 2-1. This is because the HP loss of staying 3 is never usually worth it. The only time I would ever recommend staying level 3 is if you have a lot of 1-cost pairs or you're committed to a reroll comp. Then at 2-3, you want to try and make your first 10 gold. You do have the option of double leveling to 5. However, you only do this if it guarantees that you can keep your streak, and more often than not, you're going to want a 5 streak, because if you go 5 on 2-3 and you don't keep your streak, then you're going to be in a really bad spot. But more often than not, you're just going to go 5 on 2-5. This is because, again, staying level 4 for the remainder of stage 2 is not usually worth the extra econ that you get. The only time that you don't follow this leveling pattern is if you're full econing hard so that you can roll down at 6 at 3-2. In TFT, there are a lot of examples where you'll see limiting returns through stats. Basically what I mean by this is that if you keep amplifying the same unit with the same amount of stats, then he gets less and less of a return every time you give them to him. So for example with Mundo, because he's already getting HP from bruises and HP regen through Chemtech, if you give him an item such as Bramble Vest, the extra armor is very, very beneficial because he doesn't have any built-in armor. But if you were to compare it to a unit like Braum, who already gets armor built in through bodyguards, let's say you've got a 4 bodyguard Braum, then that extra Bramble Vest isn't going to be doing nearly as much as something like a Warmogs. Now that's not to say that you have to chase after these different items. Of course, you just make the defensive items that fit your current board, but it is important to note that when you have a decision to make, for example at Carousel, and you already know which units you're already playing towards, then it is important that you're leaning towards a certain set of items rather than just defaulting to the common ones. It's really important that you balance out your augments. This means that not sticking too much to the same type of augment. So for example, obviously if you're getting defensive augments, then you want offensive as well. But the main one that's the most important is you should never really go for 2 econ augments. This is because you'll be playing the game with only 1 combat augment, which can make a really big difference, especially in stage 5. So for example, if you start the game with metabolic, then it's an absolute must that you need to start picking up some combat augments just so that you're not playing down them. This will matter the higher elo you get, but you'll definitely notice in challenger games, if I'm playing the game, for example, with trade sector and metabolic, then no matter how strong my board is, it's going to lose out to things that are a lot weaker than it otherwise. In TFT, your carry should ideally have 2 offensive items and 1 defensive. The only time I would justify running 3 offensive is if your carry is extremely safe and or you have healing augments. If you find yourself to be not hitting this mark, then you should definitely be prioritizing the items a little bit more in your early to mid game stages. Remember that the defensive item is the last item you want to put in your carry, as it doesn't usually help you streak during the early game. With that being said, you always want to make sure that you don't have 2 defensive items. 3 offensive items glass cannon style carry is almost always better than having 2 defensive. So this means that if you already have a QSS on your Urgot, for example, you need to stay away from items such as BT and GA, as you would much rather have 2 other offensive. This goes for other carries such as Jin. If you already have a BT, then you want to try and avoid items like QSS and Hodge, as this can mean that his DPS is just going to be too low and insignificant to matter about getting any extra defensive items. A lot of the time when people go to level 8 and roll down, they roll down all the way to 0 when they really don't have to. Going below 10 gold should be a desperation play that you only do when you're extremely close to death. I know this might seem like an obvious rule, but if you go below 10 gold, then due to the laws of compound interest, you're going to be missing out on a lot of opportunities to spike your board. I know it sounds obvious, but if you go back and watch some of your games, I guarantee that you and many other challenger players will drop below that 10 threshold when they really don't need to. To play strongest board, you need to be constantly asking yourself whether or not you need to be upgrading, or are you going to be left behind in the lobby. The ideal cost of your carry should be 1 below the stage number. So during stage 2 you want a 1 cost carry, during stage 3 you want a 2 cost carry, and so on and so on. You don't need to follow this religiously, but do keep in mind if you're carrying a 2-star 1 cost during stage 3, then you're going to notice that it's lacking. And this can be said for all of the other stages, and it's why I try to avoid getting my board built around 1 cost carries, as I know I need to pivot out of them anyway. This is why it can often be better to play for a loss streak during stage 2 and then tempo swing into a 2 cost carry on 3-2, just so that your stage 3 is a lot weaker. And if you find yourself in stage 4 playing a lot of 2 cost carries, then this is why you're falling behind. So as an example opener, when you're playing AD, you want to be looking for units such as Twitch and Ezreal to 2-star, but then during stage 3 it's better to play units like Trundle and Tristana, and during stage 4 you'd rather be playing units such as Shaco and Samira, and finally in stage 5 you should be pivoting into your final carries such as Jhin and Yone. You don't need to follow this exactly, but do keep in mind that if you're playing something which is a little bit too cheap, then you're going to notice that you're taking a lot more damage than you really need to be. Bruiser earlier game is a great synergy, as it gives all of your team a little bit more extra HP, and because the base HP is very low of all the units at this stage, it makes a significant difference. However, that extra HP doesn't change depending on the stage, so as you get later into the game when there's more units with more base HP, the extra HP as a percentage is actually very low, and you'd much rather be running other traits such as Chemtech, which give you percentage HP healing as well as damage reduction. Most traits scale to an extent, but figuring out which ones are more flat will allow you to decide which ones you need to be dropping in order to create yourself a much safer late game board. In this set in particular, there's only really 2 playstyles. You're either playing for tempo win streak, or you're playing Yordle's Merc open fort into a fast 8. The reason I say this is because the playstyle in between, which was very prominent in other sets, is minimizing HP loss whilst maintaining decent econ. The problem with this playstyle is that if you're not rich enough to go 8 on 4-2 or a very early time at that, then you're going to be losing all of that progress you made throughout the game, and it's much better that you just played something like Yordle's early so that you're making a lot more econ and sacrificing more HP early. This is because in previous sets you'd never lose that much HP during stage 4, but due to the prevalence of Yordle's, Mercs and Econ augments, if you're playing somewhere in the middle, then you're going to be having a tough time on 4-2 onwards, even 4-1 in some instances. To identify whether or not you think you can play tempo and streak, it usually depends on how many upgrades you hit early, as well as the combination of do you have win streak items. Some great win streak items include Morello, Sunfire, Runins and Shiv, and if I can slam these items early with some good synergies and good units, then I can definitely play for the tempo win streak, and you can push levels and play a lot more aggressively with this playstyle. Average Yordle econ is 1.4 gold. This means simply put that streaking is actually better because you'll be getting more gold and saving HP. A lot of the time with Yordles you can actually sometimes accidentally build up a streak just because you're hitting your 2 stars, but if at any point you need to drop Yordles in order to play better units, you should definitely do it if it means that you're going to maintain a streak. Even if it's not a 5 streak, you're still getting more than 1.4 gold, and you should always be looking for the opportunity to weave your Yordles in and out depending on the circumstance. Obviously you want to play around the lobby and try to make sure that you're not 3-way contested, as playing the same comp as someone else can make it a lot harder for you to hit your units. But you can take it a step further and figure out what is going to be the average level that people are rolling on. So for example, if you have a lobby where everyone's rolling for 2 cost carries and none of which are Warwick, then you can stay level 6 and go for a Warwick 3-star game, and you're much more likely to hit because everyone else is taking the other 2 cost champions out of the pool. Same can be said for any tier really, but it's just important to note that if you know how to play different reroll comps and they're uncontested and people in your lobby are playing the same cost reroll, then it's very easy for you to quickly pivot into it and hit your 3 stars much more frequently. And that is the end of the video. I hope you did enjoy learning about my 10 rules for TFT. Now remember that these rules are general rule of thumb and definitely not set in stone. Understanding how these rules might apply to each one of your games and having them as a default will allow you to bend your playstyle around them and make yourself a much more well-rounded player after learning about them. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them down in the comments below, and if you want to come chat with me on Twitch, then feel free to do so. The link is in the description. Thank you guys so much for watching the video, and as always, I look forward to seeing you in the next one.